Alex gripped the shovel, his hands aching from hours of digging under the hot sun. Building a pool in the backyard had been on Emily's wish list for years, and he'd finally decided to surprise her. She was away in San Francisco for a few days on one of her endless work trips, so he seized the opportunity, hoping the project would rekindle some excitement between them. Their marriage had felt strained lately, like a stretched rubber band, close to snapping but held together by force of habit and a decade of shared memories. But as he struck the spade into the soil one last time, the blade hit something solid. A dull, metallic clunk echoed through the hole. Frowning, he knelt, brushing aside the dirt, revealing a thin, steel lockbox hidden beneath the earth. It looked old, weathered, and deliberately buried. Alex's heart beat faster as he lifted it, wondering what it was doing in their yard. The box had a simple latch, which, to his surprise, was already unlocked. Taking a breath, he opened it, expecting to find old family trinkets or some forgotten piece of their home's history. But inside, instead, he found a neatly organized stack of documents and photographs, items that didn't belong in any family heirloom. His hands froze as he shuffled through the contents, the truth hitting him like a gut punch. There were 2 passports, one with Emily's face but a different name, the other belonging to a man he'd never seen before, a tall, rugged figure with sharp features and a smug grin. Beneath the passports were documents listing bank accounts and rental agreements for apartments in different cities, each one in her name, or rather, the name from her alternate passport. Swallowing hard, Alex reached for the photos tucked between the pages. His stomach lurched as he looked at each one. There was Emily, unmistakable and smiling in each shot, her arms wrapped around the same man, her lips pressed against his in casual, intimate embraces. There were photos of the 2 of them lounging by a different pool, one he'd never seen, posing in front of unfamiliar landmarks, looking like a couple on a carefree vacation. He dropped the photos, his hands trembling. Who are you?" he whispered, barely able to hear his own voice over the pounding of his heart. He thought of the woman he had married, the woman who had laughed with him, built a life with him. But this was someone else entirely. Someone who could live a lie so deeply it spilled into secret bank accounts, fake identities, hidden apartments. Suddenly, every recent change in her made sickening sense. The new perfume, the unfamiliar clothes, her frequent absences and last-minute business trips. He had dismissed it all as harmless, maybe even normal for a relationship going through a rough patch. But now he realized those changes weren't random at all. They were calculated steps in a carefully crafted double life. His hands clenched into fists as rage and betrayal welled up inside him. How long had she been planning this? How many times had she smiled at him, kissed him, held his hand, while planning to leave him with nothing? He felt like a fool, his entire world unraveling in that shallow hole he had dug for something as trivial as a pool. He wanted to smash the box, throw it back in the dirt, and bury it all over again. But he knew he couldn't ignore this. Not now. He had stumbled upon something darker than he ever thought possible, and the truth loomed before him like an abyss, daring him to keep digging. Alex stared at the open lockbox, his mind churning with questions he had no answers for. He felt numb, caught in a surreal haze, as if he'd stumbled into someone else's nightmare. The air around him felt thick, stifling, and he had to remind himself to breathe. He could still see Emily's smile, her familiar laugh, but it all felt like fragments of a broken picture, parts of a woman he no longer recognized. Who was she? How had he missed so many signs? And most importantly, why? He glanced back at the contents of the lockbox. The passports, the fake IDs, the photos. Each item was a clue, evidence of a life he never knew she had. He picked up one of the rental agreements, his eyes scanning the details. An apartment in Boston, rented under the name Claire Harper, a name he'd never heard before. But it was Emily's handwriting on the contract, unmistakable. As he gathered the documents back into the box, his mind raced through their past few months together. Her job had been the perfect cover, a position that allowed her to travel without question. He'd assumed her absences were part of her work, that the late nights, the muted phone calls, and the brief messages were all just symptoms of a busy life. How wrong he'd been. But Alex was done feeling foolish. Whatever she had planned, whatever double life she was living, he was going to uncover it all. He wanted to confront her right then and there, to throw the lockbox in her face and demand an explanation. But Emily was due back in 2 days, and he knew he needed to approach this carefully. Over the next 2 days, Alex's life fell into a strange rhythm. He'd work during the day, the hours passing in a blur as he mechanically completed his tasks, and in the evenings, he'd return home to that haunting box, spending hours poring over every document and photo, trying to piece together the timeline of her deception. He took photos of everything on his phone, saving digital copies that he could pull up anytime. His phone was now a ledger of her secrets, and he kept it close, as if it held the last threads of his sanity. On the day she was set to return, Alex felt his heart pounding from the moment he woke up. He knew he couldn't confront her yet. He needed more information, needed to see how she would act, what lies she'd tell him to keep her web intact. As he waited for her to come home, he felt like a stranger in his own life, an actor in a dark play he hadn't agreed to star in. When Emily finally walked through the door that evening, her face lit up with a practiced smile, and she wrapped her arms around him in a quick hug, as if she'd missed him dearly. He could smell the faint trace of her new perfume, something floral and sweet that didn't belong to the woman he thought he knew. "Hey," she said, kissing him on the cheek. "Missed you." Alex forced a smile, swallowing the rage and hurt simmering just beneath the surface. "Missed you too," he replied, his voice sounding hollow even to his own ears. Emily launched into stories about her supposed conference, weaving tales of meetings, presentations, and networking events. He listened, nodding along, feeling as if he was studying a stranger. Every word out of her mouth felt like a knife twisting deeper into his gut. Did she think he was so naive? How many times had she come home, lying so easily, looking him in the eye without a hint of remorse? When she excused herself to take a shower, Alex seized the opportunity. As soon as he heard the water running, he slipped into the guest room, where she always kept her travel bags. He rummaged through her suitcase, hands shaking slightly, until he found a small leather-bound journal tucked under a stack of clothes. He flipped it open, expecting meeting notes or work-related plans. Instead, the pages were filled with neat entries detailing weekends with Art, dinner at their favorite Italian spot in Boston, stolen afternoons in a cabin by the lake, plans for an upcoming escape, where they'd leave everything behind. Each entry was carefully dated, her handwriting betraying no hesitation. The entries painted a world in which Alex didn't exist, only her and this man, R, who seemed to occupy every part of her life he thought he'd known. He closed the journal, while rising in his throat. She hadn't just lied. She'd created an entire life, so meticulously planned that it seemed impossible he hadn't seen it all sooner. His fists clenched as he stared at the journal, feeling the rage pulse through him. But he kept his control. Storming into the bathroom and confronting her wouldn't give him the answers he needed. Not yet. By the time Emily stepped out of the shower, Alex had returned the journal to her bag and was waiting in the living room, his face carefully blank as he sipped a glass of water. She walked in, still damp, with a light smile on her face. "Want to watch a movie?" she asked, sitting down beside him and leaning into his shoulder as if nothing had changed. "Sure," he replied, his voice steady. He wrapped an arm around her, trying to keep up the facade. She nestled in close, like the loving wife she pretended to be, oblivious to the truth he held back. As they sat in silence, watching the opening credits, Alex's mind was 1,000 miles away, planning his next move. She thought she'd fooled him, that her secrets were safe, hidden in the lockbox he'd unearthed by chance. But he'd stumbled onto her deception, and now it was his turn to play the game. And as he sat there, holding her close, he promised himself one thing. He would unmask every lie, every betrayal, every secret. She wouldn't see it coming. The following days felt like a twisted game of pretend for Alex. Every morning, he watched Emily leave the house, her familiar smile and casual wave making him sick with resentment. She had no idea that he knew. She was completely unaware that her facade had begun to crumble, piece by careful piece. But he forced himself to keep the truth hidden, to match her every lie with silence, each day watching her closely as if she were a stranger in his own home. Alex knew he couldn't confront her without hard proof. He needed to catch her in the act, something undeniable that would corner her, break the intricate web she'd spun around him. The lockbox had given him clues, but not enough. He wanted the full picture, to understand how far she'd gone, and most importantly, why. So, Alex decided to track her movements, to find out where she went when she wasn't with him. He was about to become a silent shadow, following her every step without a trace. The first night he followed her, he felt a mixture of guilt and excitement. He hadn't told a soul about his suspicions. This was his secret war, and he wanted to face it alone. That evening, Emily mentioned she was meeting a friend for dinner. Her words were smooth, like always, but Alex caught the flicker in her eyes, the faintest spark of unease. As she left, he waited a few minutes, giving her time to settle into her lie, then grabbed his keys and followed her at a careful distance. The streets were dark, the headlights casting eerie shadows as he followed her car through winding side streets. She drove confidently, her car slipping through the night as if she had a specific destination in mind, but not one she'd ever shared with him. Alex stayed far enough behind to remain unnoticed, and with each turn, his heart raced faster. His hands gripped the wheel tightly as he tracked her to a small, quiet restaurant on the outskirts of town, a place he'd never seen or heard her mention. Parking across the street, he waited, watching as she exited her car and strolled toward the entrance. She looked different. Her movements were uncharacteristically free, her expression almost carefree. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen her so relaxed. Who is she meeting? He wondered, feeling the first pangs of jealousy twist with his anger. Alex watched as she entered the restaurant, her figure disappearing into the cozy glow inside. He took a deep breath, waiting, counting the minutes. He was about to give up, wondering if he'd learn anything at all by waiting outside, when the door opened again, and a man stepped out to greet her. Alex's stomach twisted as he watched the man wrap an arm around her waist, his face familiar from the photographs in the lockbox. It was him, the man from her photos, her other life. Standing there, watching as they embraced, Alex felt a nauseating mix of fury and heartbreak. She was laughing with him, her face lighting up in a way she hadn't looked at Alex in months, maybe even years. It was as if this man had become her entire world, a place where she could shed her marriage like a worn-out mask. The pair moved deeper into the restaurant, disappearing from sight, but the image of them together burned in Alex's mind, fueling his determination. He wasn't ready to confront them, not here, not now. No, he needed to know more, to unearth every hidden truth. He pulled out his phone and snapped a quick picture of them together through the window, adding it to his growing file of evidence. Tonight, he'd only watch, but he would be back. Over the next few days, Alex continued his quiet surveillance, piecing together the fragments of her secret life. He started noticing patterns. Every Tuesday evening, she met with this man at the same restaurant, each time lingering a little longer, her smile a little brighter. On Fridays, she left work earlier than she'd told him, meeting him at a small motel on the edge of town. It became clear that this wasn't just an affair. This was a second life, carefully crafted and maintained with chilling precision. But then, on one of his stakeouts, the game changed. That evening, Alex followed them to the motel, expecting the same familiar pattern. But just as he was about to turn away and head home, he saw them step back outside. They were talking, animatedly, their expressions tense. Alex pressed himself against the shadows, trying to hear as they stood by her car, their voices barely audible over the sound of traffic. From what he could make out, they were discussing something urgent, something that involved money and a plan. "I've almost got it," Emily was saying, her tone hushed but sharp. "Just another few weeks." "He has no idea." The man nodded, glancing around before leaning in closer. "I hope so, because I don't want to wait forever, Em. We've been planning this for months." Alex felt the blood drain from his face. They weren't just meeting for an affair. They were planning something that clearly involved him. He didn't need to guess to know what it was. The lockbox, the hidden accounts. She was planning to strip him of everything, to leave him with nothing. In that moment, The full extent of her betrayal hit him with crushing force. She wasn't just hiding a relationship. She was setting him up, dismantling the life they'd built together piece by piece. He felt rage bubbling up, his fists clenching as he watched them share a final, lingering kiss before slipping back inside. Alex took a steadying breath, his mind spinning with a plan of his own. She thought she was in control, that she had him fooled, but he knew her game now, and he would be ready. As he slipped away into the night, he made a silent promise. If Emily wanted to play games, then he would play, but on his own terms. He would uncover every lie, every betrayal, and when the time was right, he'd make sure she understood just who she'd underestimated. Alex's mind buzzed with anger and adrenaline as he drove home, his fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly they turned white. The image of Emily, cozying up to that man outside the motel, played on a loop in his mind, burning itself into his memory. She had perfected the art of deception. The casual glances, the practiced laughter, the smooth web of lies she spun without hesitation. He could still hear her voice, low and conspiratorial. He has no idea. She thought she was so clever, so untouchable, living two lives with ease. But she didn't know he was onto her now, tracking her every move. And in those stolen moments outside that motel, she had confirmed everything he needed to know. Her plan wasn't just to be with this man. It was to take Alex down, to rip away everything they had built and vanish without a trace. The next day, Alex woke up with a clear resolve. He would dig deeper, find the full scope of her plan, and expose every dirty detail she thought she'd buried. He felt like a man on a mission, every fiber of his being fueled by the need for justice, or maybe revenge. Either way, he couldn't turn back. He spent the morning quietly going through their home, scouring every drawer, every shelf, looking for any clues she might have left behind. And then, tucked in the back of her desk drawer, he found a small black notebook, unmarked but clearly hers. She used this desk for work, keeping her personal items in the bedroom, so the notebook felt out of place. He flipped it open, his heart racing. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, dates, times, financial transactions. Every entry was meticulous, each line evidence of a calculated mind, someone planning an escape with chilling precision. One entry, scrawled in her neat, flowing script, stood out, endgame. $50,000 by end of June. R is ready. He stared at the page, his stomach twisting as he pieced it together. So, that was it. She'd been siphoning money from their accounts, planning to run off with this man. That explained the fake identity, the hidden accounts. But it wasn't just the betrayal that stung. It was the way she'd gone about it, each detail so cold, so methodical. This wasn't the woman he thought he knew. His mind whirled with questions. What would she do once she had the money? Was she planning to vanish overseas? Or was there something more? He couldn't shake the feeling that this plan had layers, secrets she hadn't even bothered to write down. And as he read on, he felt a dark determination build within him. He would see this through to the bitter end, whatever it took. That evening, he waited for her to come home, forcing himself to act calm, even affectionate, when she arrived. Emily breezed through the door, her face lighting up as she saw him. She kissed him on the cheek, her smile as charming and false as always. "Hey, babe," she said, moving into the kitchen. "What a long day. I swear. Work's been nonstop lately." He managed a tight smile, nodding. "Yeah, I know the feeling." As she poured herself a glass of wine, he watched her, studying the way she moved, the way she held herself. He felt like a stranger in his own home, observing a woman he no longer recognized. She talked about her busy day, and he listened, feigning interest, all the while knowing her words were lies, each one a carefully crafted piece of her charade. Later, as they sat down to dinner, he casually asked, "So, do you think you'll have to travel again soon? You've been gone a lot these past few months." She paused, glancing up at him, her eyes flashing with a hint of wariness. "Yeah, maybe. You know how it is, business is business," she said, brushing it off with a laugh. "But it should slow down soon." "Good," he replied, holding her gaze a moment too long. "I miss having you around." She smiled, though he saw a shadow cross her face. "Maybe just maybe, she was sensing that something was off. But she quickly returned to her meal, shifting the conversation to safer topics, her laughter light and easy. She was good at this, he realized. Good at playing the perfect wife, at keeping her secrets neatly hidden behind that practiced smile. But as they cleared the table, he felt his anger return, stronger this time. She thought she'd mastered her double life, that he was too trusting, too oblivious to notice. But he'd seen through her now, and the time for playing the fool was over. That night, after she had gone to bed, Alex slipped out to the garage. He needed to think, to clear his mind. The darkness felt calming, grounding him as he sat in the silence, formulating his next move. He had the notebook, the photos, the hidden bank accounts, all pointing to her betrayal. But he needed more than just evidence. He needed to break her, to force her to confront the truth, to show her he wasn't a pawn in her twisted game. In the stillness of the garage, an idea formed. He would start pulling the strings, taking control of the life she thought she'd manipulated so easily. First, he'd freeze their joint accounts, cutting off the funds she planned to siphon. Then, he'd monitor her movements even closer, set traps to see if she'd walk right into them. He knew it would be risky, that she might notice his interference, but the thought of sitting back, letting her take everything, was unbearable. As he leaned back against the cool metal of his car, he felt a sense of purpose sharpen within him. She had drawn him into her game, one built on lies and deception. But now, he would rewrite the rules. She'd wanted to keep him in the dark, to use him and leave him in ruins. But by the time he was done, Emily would be the one left with nothing. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth as he pictured her reaction, the shock that would flash in her eyes when she finally realized he was no longer the trusting, oblivious husband she thought he was. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about survival. And Alex was ready to play. Alex was beginning to feel the strain of his double life. Each day he pretended nothing was wrong, playing the part of a loving husband while he watched Emily move around their house as if she didn't have a single care in the world. Her movements, her gestures, everything seemed practiced and deliberate, designed to keep him in the dark. But Alex knew better, and that knowledge kept him awake each night, his mind racing through possible next steps. One night, as he sat alone in his office, sifting through the photographs and notes he'd gathered, his phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a notification from an unknown number. He picked it up, feeling a jolt of curiosity mixed with apprehension. The message was simple. I know what she's planning. Meet me at the coffee shop on 5th and Grove tomorrow at 10 a.m. R. Alex's heart skipped a beat. R, the same initial that appeared in Emily's journal. The man in the photos. Her lover. What was he doing contacting him? Was this some kind of trick? He reread the message, searching for any signs of manipulation or threat, but it was just an invitation. He didn't know what to make of it. But one thing was certain. If her wanted to meet, it meant he knew Alex was aware of the affair. And for some reason, R was choosing to make contact. Alex's mind raced with possibilities, each one more twisted than the last. The next morning, Alex found himself outside the coffee shop, his heart pounding in his chest. He scanned the tables, looking for a face that matched the man in Emily's photos. Finally, his eyes locked onto a tall man sitting in the corner, wearing dark sunglasses and a casual jacket. It was him, the stranger who had taken his wife's heart and twisted her into someone he could no longer recognize. Taking a deep breath, Alex walked over to the table and sat down across from him. R didn't look up immediately. He seemed almost bored, tracing the rim of his coffee cup with one finger. Then, slowly, he removed his sunglasses and looked at Alex, offering a sly smile. "So, you're the husband," he said, his voice smooth and confident. Alex clenched his jaw, barely able to keep his anger in check. "Let's skip the introductions. Why did you want to meet?" R's smile faded, replaced by a thoughtful expression. He leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "Because, believe it or not, I think you deserve to know the truth about Emily and about this whole arrangement." Alex narrowed his eyes, feeling the tension coil in his stomach. "Arrangement?" R nodded, his eyes glinting with something that made Alex uneasy. "Emily told you she loved you, didn't she?" Made you believe she was the perfect wife, completely devoted. But the truth is, she's not the only one playing a game here. Get to the point, Alex said, trying to keep his voice steady. Emily isn't exactly honest with me either, R replied, his tone dropping. She's been keeping secrets from both of us. I found out a few weeks ago, and I don't intend to let her get away with it. I thought I'd play along, but then you showed up in the picture, and suddenly, I realized you might be able to help me. Alex leaned back, stunned. Help you? After everything she's done, you think I'd want to help you? R chuckled, but there was no humor in his eyes. You don't have to like me. In fact, it's probably better that you don't. But think about it. I know things you don't, and you know things I don't. We're both being played here. Alex's anger simmered as he considered R's words. He wanted nothing more than to throw it all back in his face, to walk out and never look back. But R's offer was intriguing, and Alex couldn't ignore the feeling that there was more to Emily's plan than he had uncovered. R was right. If they worked together, they could expose every last lie. What exactly do you know? Alex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. R leaned closer, his voice dropping. Emily has been setting both of us up. She's been telling me for months that you're an abusive husband, that she's only staying with you because she's afraid, that she's working to free herself from you, and that all she needs is a little more time to gather evidence for her case. She painted you as a monster, Alex. That's what she's been telling me. Alex's blood ran cold. Emily had been laying the groundwork to frame him as the villain. His mind raced back to moments when she'd exaggerated tiny arguments, times when she'd subtly hinted at feeling trapped. He dismissed it as emotional distance, but now it was clear. She'd been twisting reality, crafting a story that cast him as a monster. R continued, his tone dark. But it goes deeper. She's been transferring money from your joint accounts to private ones, building up a fund she can use to vanish without a trace, after she's painted you as the bad guy. I don't know how she planned to cut me off, but I figured it out. She's using both of us. And once she's done, she'll walk away clean. Alex felt the floor drop out from under him. This wasn't just an affair. This was a calculated, cold-blooded plan to ruin him entirely, to leave him as the scapegoat. He clenched his fists, struggling to keep his emotions in check. So what's your plan? R's eyes glinted with something dark, a smile twisting his lips. We expose her, together. I'll give you every piece of information I have, the bank statements, the communications, the documents she left in my apartment. We build a case so airtight that when she tries to make her move, it'll all fall apart right in front of her. She'll have no escape. Alex studied him, feeling a strange alliance form between them, born out of mutual betrayal. He didn't trust R, not by a long shot, but he couldn't deny the allure of the plan. He wanted to see Emily's carefully constructed world crumble, to watch her face as she realized she was the one who had been outplayed. After a moment, he nodded. Fine, let's do it. But make no mistake, the second you cross me, you're done. R smirked. Wouldn't expect anything less. They shook hands across the table, a silent pact forming between them. For the first time, Alex felt a flicker of hope, knowing that Emily's web of lies would soon be unraveled, thread by twisted thread. Over the next week, Alex and her worked together in a silent, uneasy alliance. Every day, Alex would return home, hiding his rage and hurt behind a carefully maintained mask as he watched Emily, observing every word, every gesture, like a hawk studying its prey. She continued her routine with an effortless confidence that made his stomach turn, unaware of the trap slowly closing around her. Their plan was simple. Gather undeniable proof of her lies, enough to expose her not only to him, but to the world. R proved to be disturbingly meticulous in his documentation. He provided Alex with bank statements, text messages, and photos Emily had sent him, each one a nail in the coffin she didn't yet know awaited her. One evening, Alex met her in a secluded parking lot, the dim streetlights casting harsh shadows across their faces. R handed Alex a small USB drive, his face twisted in a grin that looked almost satisfied. This, he said, holding the drive between his fingers, contains everything she's told me about you, about your marriage, every single complaint she's fabricated. She wanted me to believe you're dangerous, that she's a trapped victim, a modern-day damsel in distress. Alex took the drive, his jaw clenched. The idea of Emily painting him as some kind of monster was almost laughable, yet rage simmered beneath the surface. He thought about the years they'd shared, all the times he had genuinely tried to make her happy. How could she distort everything they'd built to turn him into a villain? As he pocketed the drive, or looked at him with an unsettling intensity. "This might seem strange," he began, his tone softer, "but there was a time I thought I really loved her, you know? She has a way of making you feel like you're the only person in the world." Alex's stomach churned. "Yeah, I know the feeling." They stood in silence, each man bound to Emily in his own way, each betrayed in ways that ran deeper than either would admit. The irony wasn't lost on Alex. This stranger across from him understood his anger better than anyone else. The next morning, Alex sat down with the USB drive, plugging it into his laptop. As the screen flickered to life, he braced himself, feeling both dread and resolve. The folder opened to reveal hundreds of screenshots and text exchanges, each one more damning than the last. He read through her words, her portrayal of him as a controlling, manipulative husband, each like crafted so carefully that anyone reading would believe her without question. "Alex doesn't let me do anything alone. He's constantly checking my phone. I feel like I'm suffocating with him. Sometimes, I'm scared of him. He has this look in his eyes, like he'd do anything to keep me here." The more he read, the colder his heart became. This wasn't just an affair. It was a calculated destruction of his character. He couldn't understand how she had become so heartless, so distant from the woman he had fallen in love with. But then, just as he was about to shut down his laptop, something caught his eye, a thread of messages dated only a week ago. In this thread, Emily wasn't just painting him as an unhinged husband. She was discussing plans with R to move funds from their joint account to a new account overseas, one he hadn't known about. The name on the account was his name, his signature, forged to look like he'd willingly authorized the transfer. His blood ran cold. Emily wasn't just siphoning money. She was setting him up for a financial crime, one that could ruin him completely. He read on, each message sinking him further into the horrifying reality she had created. In one message, she mentioned a fallback plan, a disturbing detail about how she'd hidden her bruises with makeup and had even started keeping a journal that chronicled a series of non-existent arguments and fights between them, painting a picture of a volatile relationship. He realized, with sickening clarity, that she was building evidence to accuse him of abuse if he ever dared to confront her. The ground felt as if it were slipping beneath him. She was covering every base, ensuring she would walk away from their marriage as a helpless victim, a damsel freed from the clutches of an abusive husband. She was making it look like any attempt on his part to stop her plans would be seen as aggression, or worse. Alex took a shaky breath, his mind reeling. The weight of her betrayal felt suffocating, and for a brief, terrifying moment, he felt completely trapped, ensnared in her carefully constructed lie. She had him cornered, but there was one thing she hadn't counted on. He wasn't going to let her destroy him without a fight. He picked up his phone and called R, his voice low and steady. "We need to act. She's moving funds in my name and documenting fake injuries. She's building a case to ruin me legally." R exhaled sharply. "I knew she was twisted, but this is worse than I thought. We can't wait. We have to act now." They agreed to meet that night, where R would bring a set of documents Emily had stored at his apartment, files that would, hopefully, give them the leverage they needed. It was risky, but Alex knew he couldn't sit idly by while she dug him deeper into her fabricated reality. When he arrived at the meeting place, R handed him the folder without a word. Inside were letters Emily had written, presumably to herself, recording fictional events in horrifying detail. Today, Alex grabbed my arm. I tried to pull away, but he wouldn't let me go. I'm terrified. I don't know what he's capable of. Alex could barely breathe. Each word was like a knife twisting deeper into his back. This wasn't just betrayal. This was complete annihilation, a ruthless plan to erase him, to leave him with nothing but a hollow reputation destroyed by lies. As they stood together in silence, R finally spoke. "We've got enough. This ends now. We're going to take this to the police, to your lawyer. Anywhere we need to make sure she doesn't win." Alex nodded, his jaw clenched. "This ends here. She thinks she's untouchable, that she's smarter than both of us. But she doesn't know what's coming." In that moment, standing in the cold with a man he once despised, Alex felt a strange unity, an unspoken bond between two people pushed to the brink. Emily's game was coming to an end, and soon, she would be the one trapped in the snare she had so meticulously set. The drive to the police station felt like the longest in Alex's life. Every passing streetlight threw flashes of light and shadow across his face, mirroring the storm of emotions brewing within him. He gripped the folder tightly, the pages filled with proof of Emily's deceit and treachery. With each block closer to the station, he could feel justice approaching, a chance to finally break free from the web she had so meticulously woven around him. Beside him, R was silent, his face set with determination. He had been as betrayed as Alex, drawn into Emily's orbit only to be discarded once his usefulness ran out. Now they were united by their mutual destruction, two men intent on seeing her schemes fall apart. They reached the station, and Alex took a deep breath. This was it. They would present the evidence, share every detail, every fabricated injury and bank transfer, every malicious lie she'd spun. They would reveal her as the manipulative liar she truly was. But as they approached the front desk, something strange happened. The officer behind the counter barely glanced up before giving them an odd smile and gesturing to a nearby door. "Detective Monroe is expecting you," he said in a tone that set Alex on edge. "Expecting us?" Alex exchanged a quick look with R. Neither of them had called ahead. But before he could dwell on it, a tall, thin woman with a badge clipped to her belt appeared in the doorway. She had a sharp, appraising look in her eye that made him feel exposed, as if she already knew everything about them. "Mr. Fletcher, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice calm, almost amused. "Let's take this to my office. I believe you have something you'd like to share." Her words sent a chill down Alex's spine, but he forced himself to nod, clutching the folder a little tighter. They followed her down a dim hallway, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the silence. Once inside her office, Detective Monroe closed the door and motioned for them to sit. Alex cleared his throat, willing himself to remain calm. "Detective, we have proof, undeniable proof that Emily Fletcher has been scheming to ruin me. She's planning to frame me for abuse, for embezzling money from our accounts. She's manipulating everyone around her." Monroe listened, her expression impassive, as he laid out the contents of the folder on her desk. But as she glanced down at the documents, her expression remained strangely unreadable, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. She looked back at Alex, her gaze cutting into him like a scalpel. "Interesting," she said slowly, almost mockingly. "It seems like you've put a lot of effort into gathering this evidence. But tell me, Mr. Fletcher, do you really believe it's that simple?" A flash of unease rippled through Alex. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Monroe leaned back, crossing her arms. "What I mean, Mr. Fletcher, is that Mrs. Fletcher was here yesterday. She provided us with extensive documentation, bank statements, photos, even a journal detailing months of escalating abuse she claims to have suffered at your hands." Alex's heart plummeted. He felt like the air had been sucked from the room. He shot a panicked glance at R, who looked equally stunned, his face drained of color. She was here? Alex managed, barely able to process the words. Monroe's smirk widened. "Oh yes, Mrs. Fletcher has been very cooperative. She's even shown us text messages, recordings of your alleged outbursts. She's convinced us that she's a victim who's been enduring your controlling behavior for quite some time." "No, that's impossible," Alex stammered. "Those are lies, fabrications. She's been planning this, building a case against me from the start." Monroe raised an eyebrow. "And yet, here you are, bringing me documents that only make you look more guilty. It's almost as if she knew exactly what you'd do." The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Emily had set a trap, anticipating his every move. She hadn't just hidden her plans from him. She had manipulated him into reacting exactly as she wanted. She had left enough breadcrumbs for him to follow, but only the ones that would lead him into a noose of his own making. Alex's mind raced back to every step he'd taken, every piece of evidence he'd gathered. He could see it now, the staged arguments, the journal left conveniently accessible, the whispers she'd planted in his mind. She had weaponized his own anger and desperation, orchestrating his downfall with ruthless precision. Ar leaned forward, his voice hoarse. "Detective, she's lying to you. She's manipulating all of us. Look, she's using us both as pawns. But Monroe held up a hand, silencing him. "You know, it's fascinating how the two of you have been conspiring together," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Because it only supports Mrs. Fletcher's case. She mentioned that you might team up against her, that you'd do anything to discredit her. Looks like she was right." Alex's hands clenched into fists, a wave of helplessness and fury washing over him. He felt like a fly trapped in a web, every move only binding him tighter. Emily had crafted her narrative with such skill that it was impossible to refute without seeming even more guilty. Detective Monroe tapped a finger against her desk, studying them both. "You may as well know that Mrs. Fletcher has taken out a restraining order against you, Mr. Fletcher. She claims she fears for her safety. In light of that, I suggest you both stop whatever it is you think you're doing. Any further attempts to harass her, and we'll be forced to take action." A suffocating silence filled the room. Alex's head spun, his mind grasping for a way out, a way to counter the trap that had closed so firmly around him. Monroe stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "I suggest you both leave now, and if I were you, I'd start reconsidering whatever plans you had. Mrs. Fletcher has been very clear about what she's been through, and believe me, we take abuse claims very seriously." They walked out of the station in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside, Alex turned to Ar, his voice a low, bitter whisper. She knew we'd come after her, and she set this up. She's 10 steps ahead." Ar's face was ashen. "She's not just outsmarting us. She's destroying us." For the first time, Alex felt the sting of real fear. Emily wasn't just cunning. She was ruthless, capable of dismantling his life without a hint of hesitation. He knew now that this was no longer about revenge. It was survival. Alex could barely feel his own feet hitting the pavement as he left the police station. Each step felt like he was moving through a haze, his mind clouded by the full weight of what had just happened. Emily had twisted every detail, every action he'd taken against her, turning him into the villain she'd fabricated. The officers were convinced she was the victim, and he was left with nothing but a mountain of carefully constructed lies she'd piled up to ruin him. Beside him, Ar looked equally stunned, his face drawn and tense. The satisfaction they'd shared just hours ago, believing they were close to turning the tables, had evaporated, replaced by the grim realization that they had been her puppets all along. She'd made them believe they had control, only to turn that belief into a noose. They rounded a corner, finding themselves in a narrow alley, hidden from the streetlights. Ar leaned against the wall, rubbing his temples, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's thought of everything, hasn't she? Every step we take, every piece of evidence we try to use. She's covered it all." Alex clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. "She knew we'd work together. She anticipated that we'd gather everything and try to expose her. She led us to believe we had something, but it was just her plan all along." Ar was silent, his gaze fixed on the ground, but a spark of defiance flashed in his eyes. "Maybe she's outsmarted us. Maybe she's 10 steps ahead. But there has to be a way around this. She's not invincible." Alex looked at him, the hopelessness that had consumed him slowly giving way to something sharper, a raw determination. "You're right," he said, his voice hardening. "She's not invincible, and we're not done. We need to think differently, find something she couldn't anticipate." Ar nodded slowly, a flicker of hope returning to his expression. "But what? She's already poisoned the police, manipulated everyone around her. We need something she can't deny, something so irrefutable it can unravel her story." Alex took a deep breath, running through everything he knew about Emily, every hidden detail he'd uncovered. She was meticulous, ruthless, willing to destroy anyone in her way. But he knew there had to be a crack somewhere, a loose thread she hadn't anticipated. He just had to find it. Then an idea struck him. What if we go back? Go through everything she's left behind? She's been so focused on creating a story that I'm the villain, that I'm the one to fear. But if we dig deep enough, there might be something from her past, something she couldn't erase. Or raised an eyebrow. Her past? You mean, try to find people who knew her before she became this? Alex nodded. Yes. I mean, think about it. She's not a ghost. She has a history, and we know she's gone by different names. Someone out there might know the real Emily, and maybe, just maybe, they have their own story to tell. R's eyes lit up. If we can find even one person who's seen through her facade, it could be the key to exposing her. If we can prove that her lies go back years, that she's done this before, the police won't be able to ignore that. The plan was risky, but it was the only lead they had. If they could find a shred of evidence from Emily's past, a witness, an old friend, even a former victim, it might be enough to shatter her carefully constructed story. They would have to tread carefully, but for the first time since walking into that police station, Alex felt a sliver of hope. Over the next few days, Alex and her worked tirelessly, sifting through public records, social media profiles, anything that might point to Emily's history. Each night, Alex would return home, forced to look into the eyes of a woman who had tried to erase him, pretending that he was none the wiser. And each night, his resolve hardened, his anger transforming into a focused determination to see her brought to justice. Finally, after a grueling search, they found a lead. An old college friend of Emily's, someone who had known her during her time as Claire Harper, the alias she'd used in Boston. They tracked him down to a small town on the coast, hundreds of miles away. He was a professor now, unassuming and ordinary, but he'd once known the woman who had upended their lives. They arranged a meeting, and when they arrived, the man looked at them with mild suspicion but agreed to talk. As they sat across from him in a quiet cafe, Alex explained the situation, laying out only the bare details, trying to gauge if this man would be an ally or another obstacle. The professor sighed, his face somber. Claire, or Emily, I suppose. She's trouble, that one. Back in college, she was charming, magnetic, but she had a way of getting what she wanted, no matter the cost. There was an incident. I can't say for sure, but I believe she had a boyfriend, and he disappeared. The police chalked it up to an accident, but people talked. No one could prove anything, of course, but I always thought she was more dangerous than she seemed. Alex's pulse quickened. Here it was, the crack in her facade. She'd left a trail, a history of manipulation and deception, and this professor had seen it firsthand. The man shifted uncomfortably, glancing at them both. I don't know what she's gotten herself into now, but if you're here to expose her, be careful. She's not someone who backs down easily. Alex exchanged a look with R. They had what they needed, a witness to her past, a history that matched the pattern of lies she had built around them. This was it, the piece that could unravel everything. As they left the cafe, Alex felt a new sense of purpose solidify within him. Emily had tried to bury her past, to erase every trace of the life she'd led before him. But now he held the thread that could pull her entire scheme apart, and he was going to make sure she knew she was no longer in control. Emily had played her game with calculated cruelty, stripping him of his dignity, his reputation, and his trust. But she had made one critical mistake. She had underestimated him. And now, armed with the truth of her past, he would be the one to finish this. The game wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The day of Emily's unmasking arrived, tense and thick with anticipation. Alex had planned every detail meticulously, leaving no room for error. He wanted Emily to feel the ground vanish beneath her, just as she'd made him feel so many times. The setup was perfect, a casual dinner with close friends, hosted by none other than Emily herself. She had no idea her trap was about to snap shut on her. The evening began simply, with Emily laughing and chatting, putting on her perfect wife performance. She was radiant, seemingly oblivious to the scheme Alex and R had crafted. But as the night wore on, she noticed that the conversation was veering in a direction she hadn't anticipated. One by one, the guests, who had all, unknowingly, played small parts in her deception, began sharing odd stories of Alex, tales Emily herself had fabricated over the months. Alex could see the subtle panic flicker in her eyes, but she held her composure, laughing off the moments that exposed her lies. She was good, too good, really. But tonight, he and R had come prepared with something even she couldn't manipulate. As the laughter around the table began to settle, Alex caught Emily's eye and stood, holding everyone's attention. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice calm and even. "I wanted to share something important with you all. Emily, I think you'll appreciate this as well." Her smile faltered for a moment, but she recovered quickly. "Of course, Alex. What's this all about?" "This past year, I discovered things about our marriage that I never could have imagined," he continued, his gaze locked on her, his words heavy with meaning. He reached into his bag and pulled out a folder, placing it on the table for everyone to see. "I found evidence of betrayal, of deception, and even of manipulation so deep that it almost destroyed my life." The room went silent. Emily's face grew pale, her hands tightening around her wine glass. She tried to speak, but Alex raised a hand, silencing her. "Emily," he said, his voice steady, "do you remember Claire Harper? You introduced her as a college friend, but what was she really?" Emily's eyes widened as she realized her past was about to catch up with her. Alex flipped open the folder, revealing a photograph of the professor they'd met, a man who had known her as Claire Harper back in Boston. This man remembers a different Emily, a different life, and a story with disturbingly familiar details. Emily's face drained of color, her composure slipping for the first time. "Alex, I can explain," she stammered, her eyes darting around the room, searching for support. "Oh, I'm sure you can," Alex said coldly. He glanced at the guests, each one leaning forward, captivated. "You see, I found out that Emily has been lying to us all. She's been building a false narrative, fabricating stories of abuse, hiding money, setting up accounts in my name, all to frame me as a violent husband, a criminal, and to walk away from our marriage with everything." The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Emily's mask finally cracked. Her perfect composure shattered as she realized the people around her were no longer her audience. They were her jury. "Alex, please," she whispered, her voice desperate, her gaze shifting from friend to friend, but she found only judgment and horror in their eyes. Alex pressed on, his voice sharp. "And if that weren't enough, Emily here has a history of manipulating those around her. This man here," he pointed to R, who had sat silent and somber, "was one of her pawns, too. She used him, fed him the same lies she fed all of you, even planned to frame him for the same crimes. She didn't care who got hurt, as long as her plan succeeded." R stood, his face filled with a controlled fury. "She told me you were dangerous, Alex, that she was trying to escape you. She told me that if anything happened to her, it was because of you." He turned to Emily, his voice barely restrained. "You made me believe in you. You twisted everything, and then you threw me away the second I wasn't useful." Emily opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. Her eyes darted around the room, desperate, like a cornered animal. I had no choice," she choked, barely able to keep her voice steady. "Alex, you were controlling. You wouldn't let me." "Enough, Emily," Alex interrupted, his tone as cold as steel. "I have the recordings, the bank records, the witnesses. You've told lie upon lie, and tonight it's over." Emily's breathing grew shallow, her eyes wild with panic as she realized her lies had nowhere left to hide. She glanced around the room, searching for sympathy, but found only silent disbelief and quiet anger. One of their friends, a woman who had known Emily for years, shook her head slowly, her voice laced with betrayal. "I defended you, Emily. I believed every word you said. And you were lying about everything?" Emily's hands shook as she gripped the edge of the table. "I did it because," her voice trailed off, and for the first time, she looked truly defeated. She slumped in her chair, the fight leaving her eyes. Every facade, every layer of deception, lay exposed, shredded, in front of everyone she'd so meticulously manipulated. Alex turned to the guests, his voice steady and resolute. She used all of us to build a perfect life, at our expense. And when it was convenient, she was ready to destroy each one of us, just to protect herself. But no more. The silence in the room was absolute, a heavy finality settling over the group. Alex glanced at R, who gave a slight nod, their alliance now complete. They had brought Emily down, stripped her of the illusions she had used to control them. In the days that followed, Emily's world unraveled even further. She had no way to explain the fake accounts, the staged injuries, the fabricated abuse. People turned away from her, disgusted by the depth of her lies. Eventually, she had no choice but to leave, a ghost of the woman she had pretended to be, with nothing left of her once perfect life. As for Alex, he walked away from the wreckage Emily had left behind, feeling the weight finally lift. He had lost years to her manipulation, but now, at last, he was free. Free to rebuild, free to start again, no longer a prisoner in her web of lies. And with each step forward, he knew he would never let himself be deceived again. The shadows of Emily's deception would linger, a reminder of her ruthless game, but they would no longer define him. He had taken his life back, and now, he was finally in control.